So there's kind of two very basic, I don't like dichotomies, but but I can't think of a better way to do this. There's kind of two different approaches to making music that have developed over time, and one of them is very structural, like you learn parts and repeat them. It's the basis of Western music is all about that. There's a fixed thing, and you perform this operation that's been set up to do, and which allows the director, the composer, whatever you want to call them, a great deal of control over what happens. And this mentality toward music is it's really strong in pop music, where it's more kind of about the producer than the composer. You know, it's you can assemble this, especially now with digital recording, and it's a controlled kind of idea rather than a sort of a more of an in the process. The other one is the oral traditions of music, which are, you know, folk musics and jazz and like that. And there's many blends between the two. You know, even as a part player in like a rock and roll band, there's still kind of a sense of this oral tradition behind it. And they're very different things to do mentally. It's not at all the same to be playing and responding as it is to be like reading something and carrying out instructions, or memorizing something and carrying out instructions. It's very naturally the oral tradition tends toward, and usually tends towards smaller groups. You know, like if you're going to get like 76 trombones and stuff like that all going, like you kind of need that. You know, to me it's a militaristic idea that you have regiments and you have like, you know, this regimented kind of approach. And coming up as a young musician, that didn't really appeal to me as a way to go, you know, and being a headstrong, recalcitrant type teenager and like that, I didn't take very much interest in it. Yeah, I didn't picture myself being like, you know, I would see a symphony and yeah, they seem like automata, you know, they're all these like, you know, all the same at the same time, you know, or better still, like a marching band at a football game, you know, and so I was always interested in the oral tradition style of music, which, you know, you have to like cooperate and sound good with other people, but it's kind of you have this leeway of making your choices and making sort of a personal contribution to it. Like you can't pull somebody out of a jazz band and put somebody in and have it sound just the same. It's just never going to happen. You know, as so yeah, like, you know, we're all important that way. You know, we're in. I have no idea about this, but I'd imagine that most orchestras undergo changes of personnel, and you're just like, you know, somebody leaves or gets fired or whatever, and somebody else just takes over that part, and it keeps running smoothly because there's this way of doing things that allows that, you know, and that isn't true with folksier music, with oral tradition music. So when I was coming up, I was much more drawn to music where you listened and involved yourself in the sound than kind of the jumping through hoops things. You know, I had different music teachers. I went to different schools a lot because I got expelled from some of them and like that. And some teachers' idea was, you know, and this is cool too. Like, it's not what I wanted to do, but you know, kind of you could call it vocational training, where there's a large emphasis on reading and there's a large emphasis on, you know, doing these parts. I remember when high school, I signed up for this thing called music theory class, and they didn't talk about anything. You just spent the whole class, like, you know, reading through these parts, like you know, this is, you know, and I was expecting somebody to like teach me things about chord progressions and, you know, tonal relationships. None of that in there at all, you know. I was kind of hanging out with one of the other kids, and I said, "Man, this is nothing. Like, why do you even want to do this?" And you know, and she aspired to, like, you know, play in an orchestra, and this was the proper vocational training for that. You know, she would have hated what I wanted. You know, cool. I believe she went on to play, you know, the last I heard of her, which was only a few years after high school, she was playing in a local, you know, I guess you'd call it sort of an amateur orchestra, but, you know. But that's what she wanted to do, was be part of the music that she liked, which, you know, included, like, you know, Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven and like that. And this was the training for her that did that. You know, she felt silly, like, walking around at the football game because she hated football and, you know, didn't really like all that much. But it did teach her to do what she wanted to do. That wasn't what I wanted to do, so it was of no interest to me, and I, you know, quit the class like after the first class. And these two things moved together in different ways. You know, a few years later in my life, playing jazz, like, I maybe wished I had, like, learned to read a little better at that time, and maybe, like, if I hadn't been a headstrong teenager, I would have learned the stuff they were teaching in that class and not felt like I had to identify with it so much to accept it. You know, so I sort of reverse taught myself what I would have learned in that class after a while. Not to the degree I could sure not go sit in some orchestra and play the stuff off a piece of paper and get it right. Just, you know, I wouldn't. Part of the problem is with a lot of that sort of vocational education is it doesn't provoke anybody to think that there's more to it than that. You know, that this was my objection to that class was that the teacher of that didn't want to hear about anything that wasn't in this process, you know. Like, you know, she thought I was an idiotic hippie, or, you know, like, she was thrilled when I when I came to her to drop it. I felt from that at the time, you know, when I'm like 16 or 15 or whatever, and I felt at the time was like she and her class were kind of trying to put me in the army, you know, and that was one thing I didn't want to do. And, you know, kind of teach me to march in step and do this kind of thing instead of, you know, I wanted to think about what is music and, like, whoa, you know, where can we go with this? And I think the sad thing about it is that a lot of people who were in that class probably never thought about anything else, ever. Like, this is music, you know, and everything else is just sort of some you know, there's a lot of snobbery around conservatory type training and that kind of stuff. That sort of now they let jazz in because, you know, because after a while you just can't deny that these people are really great musicians, you know, and they couldn't really get away with dismissing it anymore. But as long as they could, they did, you know. A few years ago, I read Richard Truscan's History of Western Music, and the whole thing, you know, it's I don't know, thousands of pages, and I ended up being so offended when you got to the late 20th century that there wasn't a single mention of a black jazz musician in it. You know, he mentioned a few, I think he mentioned, I don't really remember anymore, but this was like 5 or 6 years ago I read this, but he mentioned some film composers, you know, who were definitely influenced by jazz, you know, Elmer Bernstein and like that. And it just hit me, this dismissiveness, and that's what hit me in high school too, is like, you want these people to be invisible, and these were, you know, really idols of mine in high school. You know, I was just getting into like Miles Davis and Coltrane, and you know, and like that, and it's like you have the nerve to like pretend these people don't exist, you know, and that was kind of the feeling of that attitude, and I ran into that with other music teachers at other points too. I want to give props for the year after that, and a music teacher named Richard O'Connor, who was completely the opposite of that. He was all about, like, you know, we even spent time in that class. I unfortunately quit school, you know, without having a full semester with him, but he wanted us to think about things like sound and like what different ways there were for doing them. You know, he played us Ornette Coleman in class, and you know, he liked. He was kind of connected up with more like the intellectual avant-garde at the time. You know, the sort of, I guess John Cage is the daddy of all that. And he was into those big conceptual ideas, you know, what is silence and what is sound, and what's the difference between random sound and music and like that. And it was incredibly mind-opening to have him. There were students in that class who were kind of horrified that they weren't getting like any vocational training from him basically at all. Yeah, one of the girls cried because he dismissed the concept that, like, you know, he said, like, Bach is really great music, but there's other great music too. And she had wanted to be a pianist and was pretty good, and but he kind of dismissed her thing a little bit, or marginalized it in his view of music. And yeah, she cried in class. You know, they got in an argument about it, and he liked to argue. He was not in a mean way, you know. Anyway, great man, changed my directions in music, just because finally, somewhere in the world, you know, and I was 17 at this point, there was some authority figure, you know, standing up there in front of the classroom who wasn't saying, no, you do this and you do that. And like, you know, somebody who wasn't doing that. And yeah, that was awesome. Richard O'Connor, wherever you are, like, always thankful for my short period of time in your class.